We're going to now bring in Chris Galdieri. He is a professor of political science at St. Anselm College. We've reached him in Concord, New Hampshire. Thanks, as always, for making the time and on such a bombshell that has dropped here with this breaking news. What's your reaction?
Well, first, this is just an absolutely extraordinary moment. We have not seen someone who could run for another term as president step aside like this since Lyndon Johnson in 1968. And I think that speaks to the extent of the lack of confidence a lot of Democrats came to have in the president's ability to wage a re-election campaign in the wake of that debate 3.5 weeks ago.
You know, a lot has happened since that debate. We saw Hollywood stars coming out and calling for this to happen. We've certainly heard rumors that Barack Obama has been involved. We've heard that major donors have been reserving some of those donations amidst some of the concerns about his mental state, his age, whether or not he would continue on in the role. What do you think led up mainly to his decision today?
Well, I think increasingly the pressure from all of these different quarters convinced him that there was just not the support there to maintain his position as the party's candidate. I think the debate just shook a lot of people and led a lot of Democrats to simply conclude that whatever their feelings about President Biden, about his record in office, I think they concluded that he was not in shape to wage a re-election campaign to keep Donald Trump from winning a second term in the White House.
What do you think would have happened if he had gone to the polls at the top of the ticket?
That is a great question. There is a school of thought that says, well, Democrats are so opposed to Trump, they would vote for Biden, they would vote for Kamala Harris, they would vote for a ham sandwich with the same level of intensity. But those aren't the only voters that you need to win a presidential election. You need swing voters. You need voters who don't pay a lot of attention to politics. And a lot of polling, a lot of research, a lot of press coverage has indicated that those are the voters who were very concerned about the president's age, very concerned about his ability to not just win a second term, but to serve for the duration of a second term. So I think, had he gone forward, it would have been a very uphill battle to convince voters that Biden, convince those voters in particular, that Biden was able to serve another term. And I think, this president has spoken at times eloquently about the threat he believes Donald Trump poses to American democracy. And I suspect that ultimately it was the prospect of not defeating him that led Biden to say, maybe it's time to step aside and let someone else take a try at this.
Much has been said about the damage that has been done to the Democratic Party's prospects in this election over the last number of weeks. So what do you think is the job ahead now, both in terms of the best way to find a new leader, a new candidate, and also to repair the image of the party for voters?
Yeah, I think the first thing the party needs to do is settle on who their nominee is going to be and do that pretty quickly. Increasingly, it seems from the reporting on this that a lot of Democrats realize that Vice-President Kamala Harris is probably the simplest and most straightforward alternative to Biden. As vice president, it's literally her job to step in if Biden's not able to do the job. And I think, there may be other folks who are exploring a race. We'll find out what the party wants its process to look like, but I think they'd probably be best served by wrapping this up as quickly as they possibly can and moving on to prosecuting the case against Donald Trump in the general election.
There has been some who have said that, sort of a mini primary is the way to go because whoever comes out as victorious from that would be the most likely person to beat Donald Trump. Do you have a sense of whether or not that would be Kamala Harris, or is there somebody else that you think might be able to step up here?
I think there are a lot of Democrats who think that who would be, perfectly plausible presidential nominees. We've seen a lot of Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, in the last few months. A lot of Democrats like Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. There are, 40-some Democratic senators who probably see a president looking back every morning when they look in the mirror. Under this truncated time frame, I'm not sure what this mini primary would look like. A lot of the versions of this floating around, sound more like American Idol than a political party, going through a process to choose its nominee. I think, this could short circuit a lot of people's presidential ambitions. If Vice President Harris were to win the election, you probably wouldn't have a competitive primary again until 2032, I think, if I'm doing my math in my head correctly. Harris has spent 4 years working in the White House. She is probably best able to present herself as someone who can articulate the case for the Biden administration's record and argue that she can continue that work in another term. I think, especially under this truncated time frame, it's really tough to imagine just what a mini primary or a blitz primary, as some folks have been calling it, would actually look like, and how that would be, authoritative.
Does Kamala Harris want the job?
I am 100% sure she wants the job. She ran in 2020. She accepted the position as vice president. Historically, I'm just looking no farther than Joe Biden. Being vice president is a very good stepping stone to the presidency. And I think, for the Democrats to pass over the first woman vice president, the first black woman to serve as vice president, would provoke a major rift with black voters, particularly black women, who have become such an important bedrock constituency of the Democratic Party in recent years.
And we have got a statement now as we continue to follow this breaking news. Joe Biden on X, formerly Twitter: "My fellow Democrats, I have decided not to accept the nomination and to focus all my energies on my duties as president for the remainder of my term. My very first decision as the party nominee in 2020 was to pick Kamala Harris as my vice president, and it's been the best decision I've made. Today, I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this." That's the statement there. Chris Galdieri, what do you make of that endorsement? How important is that?
I think it's very important. One thing we need to bear in mind is that Joe Biden actually won thousands of Democratic delegates for the convention that the party will have next month. My guess is that most of those delegates are inclined to listen to Biden's recommendation in terms of who the party should run in his stead. So I'd say this is a very strong boost for the candidacy of Vice President Harris.
And so do all the delegates then, Biden's delegates, go over to Harris, or do you think we're going to see some drop out?
That's a really good question. I don't know for sure what's going to happen in that front. There is, I think, some freedom on the part of the delegates to exercise some judgment on their part. But again, under these circumstances, I think it's very likely that most delegates are going to follow the president's lead here.
Do you think we're going to see those donors jump back on the Democratic bandwagon and start opening the coffers again?
Well, I think the Democrats are certainly hoping that'll be the case. And I think that was probably one of the main factors in this decision. You cannot run a presidential campaign without money. And we've seen in recent weeks the Biden campaign's cash advantage just evaporate. I believe Trump actually outraised the president in the last month as Biden's numbers declined on that front. So certainly a lot of Democrats are going to be hoping that those donors will open their wallets back up.
And when you look at a potential face-off between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, what does that look like in terms of the potential outcome?
Well, it's going to be a different race. Previously to this, we were going to see a race between, to be blunt, two elderly white guys. President Biden is 81. Donald Trump is just a few years younger, and I believe 78. It was a race that we know a lot of Americans were just not looking forward to. It was a question of, well, who is going to win the voters who hate both candidates and so on and so forth. And I think with Vice President Harris as a, potential nominee, suddenly you've opened up the door for something different from that. Harris is a choice that will probably activate women voters, activate black voters in a way that Biden might have struggled to do. On the other hand, I think a lot of Democrats are going to wonder, well, is she going to be able to carry those key states in the industrial Midwest and Great Lakes region, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those, whoever wins those three essentially is almost certain to be the next president. On the other hand, Harris probably might run a bit better than Biden in states like Georgia and North Carolina, where the Biden campaign had hoped to sort of crack open the electorate and succeed there in ways the Democrats hadn't necessarily in recent years. So I think a lot of speculation will focus on who Harris chooses as her running mate, assuming that she is the nominee. Will it be somebody who can appeal to those Midwestern industrial states? Will she look for somebody who can help Democrats in the Southwest, where they've made inroads into places like Nevada and Arizona in the last few years? Or will she go for somebody who can help in the South? And so I think you'll have a lot of very rapid attempts at figuring out, well, who would be the best governing partner and who would bring any sort of electoral advantage to the ticket.
Chris Galdieri, thanks very much for jumping on air with us here as we react to this breaking news today. U.S. President Joe Biden ending his re-election campaign. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
We have now also reached Chip Felkel, a strategist with a long history in the Republican Party, and joins us now from Greenville, South Carolina. Chip, are you surprised at this news, President Biden stepping away from the race?
I think you'd have to be living with your head in the sand if you say you're surprised at this. All the stories have been pressure. It did come rather abruptly Sunday afternoon, but I can't say I'm surprised. I think perhaps the Trump campaign might be a little surprised. And it'll be interesting to see how they respond.
Yeah, how do you think the Republican Party is reacting right now?
This is a whole new race. This is an entirely new race. Now, if they're good, and they are, they've been doing some research on Harris and positioning themselves for Harris Whitmer, Harris Shapiro, Harris Bashir. And so they're probably prepared. But you now have a contrast, a much bigger contrast than you did with Biden. And I think it changes the dynamic of the race significantly.
Yeah, how so? How would going up against Kamala Harris instead of Joe Biden change the way that the Trump campaign approaches this race?
Well, for one thing, Trump is not good when it comes to campaigning against a woman. We saw how he dealt with Nikki Haley. The dynamic is off. And the more he tries to beat her up, the more he looks like he looks like a guy that is not being very nice. So he has to adjust himself. He may try to, but now he has to take a different tack than I think he would have going against Biden. I think that it really, as your previous guest said, I think a lot is riding on the VP pick in this thing. I don't see. Look, they should pick somebody from the Midwest because Pennsylvania, as your guest said, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Those are the states that are going to matter. Trump's going to win the South, and unfortunately, he'll probably win the South even more so because, bad as I hate to say it, African American woman at the top of the ticket.
Okay, much has been made of sort of the damage that has been done over the last few weeks since the debate. How much do you think the Republican Party is counting on that damage lasting, them not being able to catch up, them not being able to repair and bring back the swing voters that maybe have already moved over to the Republican Party?
Well, I mean, I think all the enthusiasm that came out of Milwaukee, they're still, justifiably riding high, unified, all behind Trump. But for this to come, 3 days after they wound up their convention, kind of changes the mood. Now they've got to figure out, okay, should we be excited to run against Kamala Harris? Should we start kind of wondering what our strategy is going to be? The Republicans are unified behind Trump, and it didn't matter who he ran against; they're going to be unified. But it does change the equation in a way that I think has to give maybe not the folks who were in Milwaukee, but certainly people who lean towards Trump. I'm not saying they're going to vote for Harris necessarily, but it certainly changes at least the way they look at the race. And I do think suburban housewives around the country, how he campaigns against her could be a very interesting strategy.
And in terms of strategy, of course, we're watching for any reaction from Donald Trump, Republicans on this. If you're advising them now on how to react to this news, what do you think is the right course for them?
Oh, I think the right course would be to welcome her to the race, attach her as much as they can to what they were attacking Biden and Harris on. They'll probably question, like most VPs, what exactly has she been doing for the last 3 years. I won't repeat what John Nance Garner said about the job, but they'll turn their attention very quickly. They will not be. I would advise them to be gracious. I would even advise them to say, okay, Biden, congratulations on their service. We welcome Harris to the race. Now let's go get them. I don't know if Trump can do that. I know his advisors would probably hope he would. The way they handle this might actually affect some of those people who came out of last week, who'd had doubts about after the debate and concerns there. I do think it's very important for how they respond to this. They may already have a statement out by now.
What will you be watching for now?
Obviously, the Harris's VP pick. I think that's probably the most important decision she's made, besides getting out of the presidential race 3 years ago. Biden is out now, not only because of the debate and not only because of the donor thing. Biden's out because he doesn't want to tarnish his legacy. And if he stayed in and he lost to Trump, all of it would be blamed on him. And so this is a legacy move. It's a smart move, I think, but it's also about protecting his legacy should Trump win in November. And I think Biden wants to go out on a high note. I'll be watching whether Biden's engaged in the campaign for her. I doubt he will. I'll be watching the pick. I'll be watching what this does in battleground states related to the numbers changing. I'll be watching swing voters, particularly in urban areas, particularly those with women, as it relates to the issue of abortion. It's one thing to have Biden saying he's in favor of that. It's another thing to have Kamala Harris do that. So I'll be real interesting to see what the reaction to her is in the polling numbers and just in everyday conversations with people.
Very interesting, and thanks very much for coming on so quickly there with this breaking news. That's Chip Felkel, a Republican strategist.